In this episode, we're going to hear about an underground government lab that is hiding something. Then we hear from a park ranger at Mammoth Cave. And finally, we're off to West Virginia to hear why this person doesn't go to his cabin anymore. But before we get into the stories, if you like strange and weird encounters, you're in the right place. Now let's get to the stories. Hey Donovan, I have a story for you. I would rather not say exactly where I live, but it's in the southeastern part of the United States, near a national government laboratory. Many of the employees at the laboratory are not allowed to talk about the projects they are working on outside of work. However, it's not uncommon to corner an uncle or a friend that is employed there and try to weasel information out of them. They will sometimes drop tidbits or even tell crazy things that are not classified. One night, after an uncle of mine had a few too many drinks, he started talking about this creature they kept at the lab. He described it as stickly, thin, bone-like, and bald. He said its eyes were too big for its head, and its hands and feet had long, bony appendages. He said he had seen it deep in an underground bunker located under the lab. My uncle was an architectural engineer. He had been called in to determine the structural integrity of a bunker. According to him, the government had built the shelter during World War II, and whatever was being kept there was breaking it down. My uncle had been led deep into the complex and down several tunnels until he arrived at the bunker. He said the bunker resembled a bank vault, like those from old bank heist movies. He said the escorts had instructed him not to look at the back of the structure, just the interior section tied to the hallway. At first, he said nothing stood out, but then he looked up and saw evidence that something dangerous was being kept inside the bunker. He said that there were claw marks deep into the walls. He was baffled because the bunker was made of thick concrete and steel. He said it would be impossible for a human or a wild animal to leave those marks on the wall. After examining the walls, he said aloud that they should still hold for several years. At his prognosis, he said he had heard a terrible sound from the back of the bunker. It sounded like a wail and a high-pitched screech in one. Without thinking, he quickly turned and peered into the back of the bunker. It was then that he spotted the creature. He said it was restrained in a seated position, so he could not tell its full height or size. He said the guards quickly rushed him from the room and had more guards posted in the front of the bunker. One guard escorted him back to the surface level and out of the tunnels. The guard took him to an office, and they repeatedly asked him questions about what he had seen. He said he knew better than to admit that he saw it. He kept repeating that it was dark and only saw the front of the room. The laboratory is surrounded by acres and acres of woods. Armed guards patrol the perimeter, and signs are posted everywhere that it is a violation to cross the boundary. And many employees have told me that snipers are scattered throughout to stop intruders. Hunters occasionally drift near the perimeter, but no one crosses it. However, one side of the lab is a rural highway. It goes directly along the side of the border. It is a narrow 2-lane road that locals use only to reduce their commute time. On this road late one night, I saw some strange lights floating above the road directly ahead. As my car approached, the lights seemed to be the same distance ahead. I began to have wild ideas, but then quickly smashed them for the thought of someone has a drone. Yep, some kid has a new birthday present. Then the lights started to speed up and move from side to side. I wasn't sure what to think at that point. The next thing I know, the lights do this wild swirl and then nosedived into the woods up ahead to my left. Next, as if they had been following or chasing this object, a surge of lab police vehicles swarmed the wooded area. They didn't seem to notice me in my little black Civic and all of the commotion. I heard the worst noise when I came closest to the spot on the road to where the lights crashed. It was this screeching wail. My windows were up and the noise was still off the charts. I pushed my foot on the gas and quickly passed the commotion and made it off the remote road. For weeks I watched the local news and listened for any indication that something had happened on that remote road. Yet nothing was ever said. In my mind, that noise came from a creature like the one my uncle had seen trapped in a bunker years ago. I don't know if it was the same creature or its companions that had come to rescue it, but I went from a skeptic to a believer. Thanks, Lynn. Hi there, Donovan. Thanks for getting this content out to the people. My strange encounter happened about a year ago. I know this story is not one of your typical encounters, but it happened. I've seriously been shaken ever since. I work at a national park in Kentucky. It's called Mammoth Cave. Mammoth Cave is a massive cave system currently known as the most extensive cave system in the world. It has over 420 miles of explored tunnels. It is still expanding. The portion outside the cave is a large park as well. It's a great place to take the family on vacation. Families hike and kayak and explore the caves. However, as I say this, I also preface with being cautious of your time inside the cave. I have worked at many parks throughout my career. I have a niche in war history, specifically weaponry. Mammoth Cave was an exciting placement for me. The bats that live in the cave produce guano, bat poop, a key component in potassium nitrate, better known as saltpeter, used during earlier wars. Enslaved people were forced to mine it. Several artifacts from that period have been recovered from the cave. I am not one to typically believe in wild tales, but after my encounter I discovered your channel, hoping to make sense of what I saw. Honestly though, it has led me to believe that many things in our big world are unexplained. Anyhow, I digress. Part of working the caves means giving tours. Tours become monotonous quickly. Tourists are always asking the same questions and I'm giving out the same answers over and over. It's rinse and repeat. I always try to be engaging. It was Tuesday in the second tour that I had given that morning. I had a relatively large group of people. Part of the group was a family of 3, a mom, dad, and a girl about the age of 10. The family was relatively quiet, but seemed engaged throughout the tour. Of course, the cave comes with its legends. Some of these are spirits that haunt the cave, but I never gave this much thought. I never even considered that there was such a thing as a ghost. I would, of course, tell the stories in the hope of engaging my audience, but I had never seen anything to make me believe that there was any truth to it. As I led my group to the haunted chamber, I noticed the temperature had changed. The temperature change seemed odd because the cave keeps a consistent 54 degrees once inside and away from the entrance. Over my time working within the cave system, I had been accustomed to the temperature. I remember thinking that perhaps I was getting sick. As I began speaking to the group, the internal light system glitched. The lights were not going off, but they were dimmed. The lights dimming was unusual. During this, I glanced at the family standing before me to the right. The daughter suddenly pitched forward like someone had shoved her from behind. Her dad's quick reflexes saved her from a fall. I asked if she was okay, and she said someone had pushed her. The strange thing was, her family was to the side, and no one was behind them. I checked that she was okay and had my partner continue with the group while I attended to this family. As I leaned down in front of the girl, rocks started shuffling behind her. Small stones about the size of driveway gravel began rolling. The ground was unlevel in this chamber section, but not enough for the previously undisturbed stones to move. I told the family that we should catch up with the group and leave now. As we exited the chamber, I saw someone's back as they rounded a rock outcropping, thinking that this was another tour member trying to be funny by being disruptive with the historic site. I quickly returned to the area to confront them. Guess what, Donovan? Nothing. No one was there. The entire room was empty but for myself. There was nowhere someone could have hidden or gone to escape. I am nervous and anxious and a little sick at this point. I quickly caught up to the group, and luckily we were at the end of the tour. I took the rest of the day off and debated returning to work the next day. I'm unsure if it was the girl, the time we were there, or me. I have no idea. But there is truly something supernatural inside Mammoth Cave. Got a short story for you, Donovan, from my home in West Virginia. I live in a city in the north of West Virginia called Fairmont, but this happened at my buddy's hunting cabin in Berkeley County. Berkeley County is one of the easternmost counties of West Virginia, and it sits at the top of the Shenandoah Valley. The Shenandoah Valley is part of the Appalachian Trail. The trail is a hiker's paradise. It goes down the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's truly a beautiful area. My buddy has a hunting cabin that is pretty remote in this area. I believe it was family land handed down. He rarely goes, and the cabin had not been used at that time for a few seasons. When my buddy suggested that we take a long weekend to be mountain men, what we call hunting, fishing, and roughing it, I was all in. We packed light because the cabin does have some of the necessities like running water. The trip into the cabin was great. The views are truly unmatched. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon and settled in for the night. Everything in the cabin seemed to be in order as we quickly glanced about. Besides finding a snake in the woodpile, the afternoon was relatively uneventful. We were pretty beat and we went to sleep around dark, so it was probably around 9 p.m. Near 1 in the morning, something made a noise outside my room. It startled me awake. It sounded like something had fallen. Knowing that the cabin had not been in use and most likely wild animals had become comfortable coming close, I thought it was most likely a deer or a raccoon. I must have drifted off to sleep because when I startled awake again around 1:45, this time there was a loud boom. My buddy had woken up too. He was on the other side of the cabin. Both of us quickly grabbed our guns and a light. We tried at first to peer out of the little window in the cabin, but due to it being small and unclean, it was impossible to really see out. Then we decided to creep out and see what caused the commotion. As we slowly and quietly slid out the front door, we saw that the heavy wooden bench that sat out front had been tossed upside down about 5 feet away. The area is known to have bears and wild boar. The bears can be quite large, and the boar are just stupid destructive. Yet not a single creature was in sight. It was late and I was on edge. We decided it would be best just to hunker down for the night. The original plan was that we would get up super early Friday morning to hunt, but after the night we had, we decided we wouldn't go until after daylight. At daylight, we began poking around outside. We didn't realize it at first, but then we realized there were faint tracks all around the cabin. The tracks were odd. The creature was for sure not a bear or a wild boar. This thing had a foot span longer than a typical man's. We measured it about 14 inches long. It favored the outside of its feet, so a width measurement was impossible to get accurately. I wear a size 12 shoe, and it was easily wider and longer. The creature seemed to have toes or something. At this point, I started searching Google to see what type of tracks these could be. So my buddy and I decided to start having breakfast. He had brought a grill for us to cook on, so we went to the truck to dig it out. This quickly turned into some frantic hollering. During the night, whatever had flipped the bench had obviously helped themselves to most of the supplies in the back of the truck. The grill was still there, most likely due to it not being super portable. But our extra hunting gear had been taken. Our cooler was gone, and so were several of our knives. Luckily, we had brought all the guns inside when we arrived. We also had begun to entertain the idea that some druggy mountain people had stumbled upon us last night. It didn't exactly explain the bench, but it did the stealing. And then we had a decision to make. We could try to salvage what we could and stay till Sunday, the original plan, or we could take off. I was ready to leave, but I didn't want to admit it. My buddy still wanted to stay and do some exploring. I think he was sore about having been stolen from and was hoping to come across his stuff. After breakfast, we decided to do some scouting. We took off on foot with our hunting rifles. We had probably walked about 15 minutes when we approached the creek that borders one side of his property. We were ready to follow the creek for a bit when I spotted something orange across the creek. We waded through a narrow part of the channel and found that the orange item was my hunting safety vest. It looked like it had been dropped. At this point, my buddy wanted to continue in the direction the vest was left, to see if we could find the thieves. We continued on, but at this point I was getting a little spooked. Then my friend pointed out a cave, a huge open-mouthed cave. My buddy is all pointing and trying to whisper that the druggies might be hiding out there. Then something happened. A large creature, hunkered like a bear, moved to the mouth of the cave. It was on all fours, but its back was angled high. It was covered in this shaggy fur like a sheepdog would have. It was brownish and black. I couldn't see its face, only its back and a little bit of its side. At this point, it slowly started to rise. It kept rising, slowly lifting its large, heavy body. I was a good distance, but it was easily over 7 feet tall. It didn't have any clothing on, only shaggy, hairy fur. I stood completely still, afraid to move or even breathe. This thing stealthily moved into the cave. At this point, I am done. No amount of convincing would have kept me hanging around. I glanced at my buddy, and he was the same. As quietly as possible, we moved back towards the creek. We crossed and then ran back to the cabin. Without saying a word, we packed up our stuff and took off. It was probably about 10 minutes up the road when we finally began to really speak. We decided to stop by the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office was a laid-back place. Funny enough, it even had coffee and donuts sitting out on the counter when we went in. We asked to speak to someone in private about some items being stolen. I think we were obviously scared of what we would say when we began to speak. The receptionist walked us back to a small office. Sitting at the desk was an officer, and he asked, what could he help us with? I finally worked up the nerve and explained that we had been hunting at a cabin on the North Rim, and that we had been woken in the night to some items being stolen from our vehicle. He asked for a more specific location, and when we gave him a closer address, he began to smirk. He asked what we did after the items were stolen, and we described our morning. When I told him about the creature, he did put on a more serious face. In a drawl, he said, "You two are lucky. We have a bandit of sorts on that mountain. Most see evidence of him passing through, but very few have been able to catch a glimpse. Gentlemen, thank you for your time in Berkeley County, and have a safe trip home." Needless to say, the cabin has now been officially abandoned. My buddy hasn't been back, and as far as I know, no one else has. It's a story we tell friends, but no one ever believes us. I know what I saw, and there is a giant creature that lives in that cave. Let me know in the comments below what you think of these submissions, and if you like my narrations, then consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, if you like true crime, I do have a true crime channel, and the link to that is in the description below.